Hello there, I'm max.lewy, and I'll just try today, 24th of March 2021, to make another little marketing pitch for my books, particularly my main book, which I've written over the past 2 or 3 years, about my experiences with mental health, so-called mental health system in South Wales, United Kingdom, and also my general thoughts and observations about society in general, and also just human nature in general, borrowing from and referencing the full philosophical tradition of the West, particularly going back to the ancient Greeks, especially Plato, and of course his mentor Socrates, and then through thinkers like Descartes and John Locke, the Enlightenment, Francis Bacon, and all the way to more recent times with the postmodern and existentialist thinkers, most of all Nietzsche, and then his followers, or those who came after him, such as Martin Heidegger, Michel Foucault, and Slavoj Žižek, Jordan Peterson, and one other thinker, not quite so famous, but at least as good as all of these, Emil Cioran, the Transylvanian Romanian poet philosopher, moved to France, wrote mostly in French in his latter career, after giving up his youthful fascism in Romania, to espouse a more resigned and ironical anti-fanaticism, a doctrine of tolerance, based upon hard-won experience. And so the book's about 700 pages long, and contains lots of poetry, and then lots of aphorisms in the manner of Friedrich Nietzsche, who is the philosopher who most influenced me and who I find most worthwhile reading, in terms of insights per minute. And then, a few kind of like mini essays and lots and lots of more flamboyant, modern kind of artworks, which I hammered together myself from around the internet, making a unconventional and very avant-garde work of all-round literature and art, because for me, philosophy and art, should be brought together more, with a less fusty and somewhat pompous scholarly front, and more of an all-around an immediate human element. So I say that because many people will sniff at non-academic things, non-scholarly things. They'll immediately think, oh, this is just amateurism, this is childish, or it's not serious, it's because it doesn't have the formal scholarly or academic trappings, and that's just not very fair or very intelligent way of seeing things, because if you look at a lot of the writers I mentioned, like Nietzsche especially, his approach was more like mine, and he was much better than almost anybody else, and people have been more affected and influenced and stimulated by his writings to genuine enlightenment than I'm going to say almost the entire scholarly body of work, even, because then Plato, one could say a similar thing about his writings, or Emile Turan again, and So it's important for people to realise, obviously, that art can be just as intellectually serious or more so than a work of formal philosophy. And um, it shows a higher level of ability on the part of the reader or the part of the observer, consumer of work of art, to be able to appreciate the profundity and the philosophical value of something which isn't a formal work of philosophy than it is for them to interpret simply a work of formal philosophy. So that's what people should aim for more. In the budding intellectual movements of today, particularly on the the new right, the alt right, the movements which there's some genuine um, potential, spiritual and intellectual, from that uh, group, um, which which could be harvested in a slightly more artistic direction, hopefully, and with with an even sharper hermeneutical facilities. Um, I guess it's like it's a real feast of a book, and um, to me it seems a very natural idea to blend these different elements, and I feel like um, it's just um, a big um, uh, um, yeah. Uh, so um, I was thinking I'll speak for about like I don't know an hour or so about this. Um, and it's, here's the book. See, it's a very colourful cover. Nietzsche on the front, with the staff of Caduceus on his forehead. That symbol being one of the symbols of modern medicine, and also with some occult significance. You can see it featured in the work of Aleister Crowley. And it's the staff of Hermes, also the Greek god Hermes, son of Zeus, who was a messenger god associated with the planet Mercury, who is very, very adept with language and very swift of foot, and he also stole cattle from his brother Apollo. And that's a bit like how psychiatrists they steal the health and the strength, the virility of a lot of their patients. Same way that Hermes stole cattle from his brother Apollo. And there's Jordan Peterson on the front and the back. And the phrase "order to chaos," which you might remember from the Alex Jones show some years ago, or other places, which is of course an interesting variation on the Jordan Peterson theme of searching for order. And of course, a book on madness, mental illness, is it's quite in keeping with that, with this idea, order through chaos. And I'm really searching for a publisher for this book, so I don't really have one already. So that's my main I suppose goal actually in talking about this today, is to find somebody, preferably a big publisher, who's really willing to take on this significant and substantial, sizable work of continental philosophy, the manner of Nietzsche, Emile Cioran, or French aphorists, but from an Anglo-Saxon, half Jewish, Welshman living in the United Kingdom, writing in English, and yeah, and support it and try to get it out to lots of really lots and lots of people, particularly the younger generation. I think it could really have an appeal to and resonate with many of the same people who would be interested in the work of Jordan Peterson, but with a more youthful, vibrant feel, more in keeping with the Nietzschean emphasis and concept of vitality, of human vitality, of masculinity, of virility, and self-expression and personality. Um, all these things which are in the work of Jordan Peterson, they are suppressed, they are repressed, they are under emphasized compared to work of Nietzsche or um, you know who John Peterson supposedly is very influenced by, and who references this aspect of Nietzsche is almost totally suppressed and in the opposite direction in the work of Jordan Peterson. Whereas in this book we see the full flowering of that more Nietzschean approach applied to today, and engaging with appreciation for the work of Jordan Peterson and contemporary society, contemporary political trends, um, and contemporary culture, including popular culture, um, and in a way it stretches from the demotic to the Mandarin, effortlessly shifting between one and the other, in a way that potentially creates a major all-encompassing work of art for today, that binding a culture uh, you know in Heideggerian terms, presencing a a collective worldview, um, binding a culture, and in a way that can provide a more holistic view, comprehensive view of the world for people to find their bearings with, compass, you know, um, which shows the the full all-round nature of society, to some extent at least, as opposed to what we've had for the last 20, 30 years in the West, very much, which is often much more increasing specialization, um, of the ordinary public, where the understanding of the whole is diminished, or it's very filtered by a press which only gives very one-sided, agenda-driven news and views, and particularly young people are often shut off from a more holistic view of things, and they are shunted into their own little lines, their own little um, technical um, competences or expert fields, um, with often among the general public, even among professionals, even among experts in their own fields, a lingering or amazing lack of basic philosophical understanding or knowledge, um, about the world, about language, about human nature. Um, and this book, like I say, goes much more in the opposite direction. That's still necessary if the world has not changed so much. Um, people have already, kind of supplemented these weaknesses that I'm talking about. I'm sure not everybody has, and it's giving a whole much more natural and holistic view of life and the universe and everything. Um, and it's very much kind of a work of therapy as well, which is very different from, I suppose, most books, particularly intellectual books. Although obviously you have a lot of self-help books with quite a lot of understanding inside of them. Um, this is kind of more overtly intellectual and philosophical, and the same, it's also more overtly a work of therapy than most books. And so it's a practical application of the idea of catharsis, the purging of strong emotion through art, um, and this is really taken to a greater degree, and you know um, combining all of these qualities much more than probably almost any other recent books that you would have released at all. So it's probably pretty much unique in that aspect. Um, and so every page is both a work of therapy and also a work of art, and a work of philosophy, genuine, very objective in some ways, and universal psychological insights, philosophical insights, similar to those you'd find in Nietzsche. Um, and it also draws on the religious traditions, cult traditions, um, contemporary music, lyricists like Morrissey, Lana Del Rey, Smashing Pumpkins, um, uh, and there's a Joker theme running through the book. The recent Joker phenomenon, because there's many resemblances between that character and the kind of emotions that I was going through over the recent years, and my response to the crisis that I experienced. because as Nietzsche just said, laughter is the best medicine. Nothing kills like laughter. Kills the things which are hurting you or trying to destroy you. Um, Laughter is the best medicine. And mockery. Um, Being above it in some way. And it's potentially in colour, but it'll probably be too expensive to print the whole book in colour, because it's 600, 700 page book. But there's lots of art, so lots of pictures, and I think it could be like enormously interesting and inspiring, for young people, giving them real experience of very different and life-affirming, yet colourful and complex poetry. Very contemporary, dealing with lots of more sort of current themes and symbols and references, but also stretching back, to ancient mythology as well, referencing ancient gods like Zeus, Dionysus, Hermes, Apollo, and then, like I say, the literary and philosophical traditions, history to some extent, and also Christianity, and taking novel and interesting, radical, complex, new approaches to all these subjects, throwing light on them from a different angle. Um, um, and and showing how they apply to the understanding of so-called mental health, in the field of mental health, and how they can actually help people, or that's the ability to change people psychologically. And obviously, if you look at culture society today, there are many people who are very, very interested in these ideas, and they're also interested and have more of a conspiracy mindset, an alternative mindset, a rebellious mindset towards the mainstream culture of the last 20, 30 years, the mainstream news, which this book is the almost the absolute representative of. in a certain way which is accessible to most people, more so than the typical, conspiracy kind of books, because this book takes a kind of a more comes from an originally more kind of mainstream angle, um, which consciously attempts to undermine and to engage with the more mainstream approaches in a way that the very confrontation with the mainstream uh, narratives is forefronted more than the actual meat of individual conspiracies. So overall, it's like a typical philosophical um, critique of conformist ways of thinking, and a exhortation by way of example to a more rebellious, a more independent and radical um, view of the world and way of being and thinking, um, which is the archetype of the true philosopher or the philosopher. Um, so that is the overall artistic pathos of the book, and I'm sure this can appeal to an enormous amount of people who are looking to become a bit more individuated, to use Carl Jung's term, and to become more along the identity of a philosopher than along the identity of any of the contemporary political groupings that we often see today. Although this book would probably appeal potentially to many of those other people, who are already more aligned with one group or other, right across the spectrum, than you know as well. Um, so there's a huge amount of detail and richness, kind of in this book, and all a spectrum of emotion, from very depressive, to states, akin to tragic states, duendy, as Nick Cave, you know, um, describes it. The deep sadness that you can kind of hear in the works of Nietzsche, um, or sense in the works of Nietzsche at times. A profound human longing and sadness, and then also lots, and then also more humorous states, joyful states, and mad, manic states, and so the highs and lows, and probably most things in between as well, um, and um, and so there's an enormous amount of potential um, variety that um, can attract a very varied and wide audience, and um, um, it's all based upon like my 12 years or even longer of involuntary mental health treatment, so-called treatment by South Wales NHS, in which I was just spending in absolute misery, total agony, all the time for all these years. Started beginning when I was 23, when I was sectioned totally against my will, and turning my life into a living nightmare and making me feel it was over before it had started. And then finally recovering, somewhat and being let off the chain a little bit, and being in it, in such a way that I was able to finally, write these and release these books about that experience and how I managed to salvage something from that and actually reach a stage which, by ordinary standards, I'm functioning, very well. I'm quite, you know, getting reasonable pleasure from existence for the first time. Um, and um, perhaps this could help a lot of other people. And um, you know, I've developed a very thorough understanding of the mental health system and also human psychology in general. And I have lots of tips and wisdom, just like John Peterson does about human life and how to live it better and overcome neurosis or problems or nihilism or general unhappiness or ill health. Um, and um, there's also there's a very strong moral dimension to the book, where it is in many ways a plea and a cry for humanity towards the people who are currently being locked up, and treated against their will in the mental health system, in the West and around the world. So there's also a call to action in the book and a potential, very motivating and inspiring, mission that people can take from it, which also would be a very attractive feature for many people. Uh, can give, in Dylan Peterson's terms, their life, a meaning. In this case, a meaning which has been somewhat worked out and prepared by the things I've worked through in this book, and but which have universal validity for today. Um, um, so that is again a very strong um, uh, attraction, of of my writing. Um, uh, and um, full title of the book is Gaslit by Madman on Philosophy, Madness and Society. Um, and it's also very influenced, references other thinkers in the mental health movements like Thomas Saz, R.D. Lang, Seth Barber, Ken Casey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Carl Jung as well, um, and Freud, um, and um, perhaps I should just read out a little bit of different sections. Read out one poem. Start with Night Stroll, this poem is called. Through the skylights, the moon cools palely down, gliding across at its frozen pace, tempting me from my lair. Like a plume of smoke, emptied of its flame, I ride the winds down the patio, incognito, to the chipped bark path that traverses flowers, foliage, trees. Heart still crackling with the ash of previous nocturnes. A soft, piteous breeze ruffling my long cotton sleeves. Lantern gleaming from across the pond, I wander further into Cimmerian shade. Slinking through the dell, upon the hill, liaising with firefly and daffodil, bargaining with moth and Mayweather, assuring the azaleas that everything will work out well, comforting the camellias, the rain soon will come. I ramble deep into the garden, with Onmost now, taking a light swig from my flask of rum. In the not too distance, through the corner of my eye, I spy a star shaped like a hammer, falling to earth, above the sickle, the crescent moon. Can the ways and justice of old sustain us, or will they crumble come June? I put my mind to my ear, it is a simple shell. I listen rapt to the strange currents that tarry. The starry dome above me, like a gigantic blueberry. The earth beneath my feet, so wholesome and well. Humming a rhyme by the old oak tree, I throw a dime in the wishing stream. The old farmhouse barn, it never did seem to rust, but I am rusted now in innermost dream. So, I wrote that poem a few years ago, and it's kind of a romanticised walk through my garden here in South Wales, which my mother is very avid with. Her absolute favourite thing to do, and I've been somewhat neglectful of the actual my interest in this garden, but I like trying to bring it to life in poetry. Maybe that inspire me to go out and actually take such rambles. And there's some more reference to Islam and socialism in the poem, which we see on the ascendance now in society over the last 10-20 years, pushing out the culture that was there when I was born, which one cannot embrace as a totally unmitigated blessing. So yeah, you see the somewhat of alignment and a potential appeal with the slightly more right wing or alt right, new right movements there coming through my writing, but then there's also the opposite kind of tendency in some ways, because it's so liberated and so such a blend and so multicultural in so many ways, which is still not really that present in many of the gestures of the the new right, which is at times a bit stubbornly clinging towards itself, and the traditional conservative values and culture of the older Western society. And just read out short aphorism as well, perhaps. First, read out another small poem. It's called "The Gag of Being" by Max.Lewy, the joke messiah. Um, if life is a sad comedy and death is the punchline, man is the gag of being. An ape who fancies herself a god, heart-laying, muffled, gagged in agonizing, desperate, unbearable silence its entire life. Just when it thinks it's got it all sorted, it opens its mouth, at last, confident to speak. Kaboom! There rolls her head across the safety mat. Because if I need to explain that to anybody, which probably don't, I don't know, but of course, the mental health system is like a safety mat which decapitates you. Um, or something very similar. Uh, lobotomized until very recently, and still in less obvious ways. Of course, that's inspired by the line of Martin Heidegger, "Man is the poem of being," which is a very beautiful little line. Um, but yeah, it's obviously a pun on the word gag. Um, the joke being, and also as gag is into silence. Um, so just read out a couple of short aphorisms as well. Madness and art. This is quite a radical aphorism, especially in the way it's stated. It uses hyperbole, which a lot of this writing, this book does, because it has a mad free style, which is wantonly wanton. Uh, 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 uh. Madmen and poets are alike. They both give freer rein to their emotional and linguistic expressions, and is considered decent. And both of them, too, do it largely for socially admirable therapeutic reasons. Albeit the mad one is often more misunderstood, since people forget that all life, and the unartistic life most of all, is a good opportunity for art, for therapy. The unartistic life is the most drab, automatic, unredeemed kind of life, in which salutary disruptions are still possible. No one blinks twice if they see an eviscerated heart in an art gallery nowadays. But if they see an eviscerated heart where it's still in someone's chest, it's magic. And there's a little quote by an anti-psychiatry activist, poet named Dolly Sen as well, on madness. Madness might mean my mind is at war with itself, but psychiatry has made me a refugee, my own soul. Art is the map out of all of that. So I hope people would be able to interpret those few lines immediately, almost by themselves anyway, and immediately see the relevance of them and feel immediate sympathy with them. In our closeted, confined, uptight world, um, um, and not require too much further explanation. But I could go into lots and lots of detail about this as well. Obviously, literally, we have dead sheep's carcasses in art galleries nowadays. But often in real life, we have very, very little art. At least in some people's homes, or if you have anything to do with the mental health teams, things are, in a certain sense, they are, gerrymandered and pushed into narrow lanes. The entire conduct of human beings, where to do something different can be seen as very threatening or threatened. Whereas there's a possibility of going very much in the opposite direction, either a little bit or a lot, where you have, which we've already had, in society, obviously, a lot of, whereby people do, stunts, can do stunts to try and make people think more. Like, for instance, you'd have perhaps somebody like the street magician David Blaine, who would challenge people's perception in certain ways, in a way that's very interesting. It's magic. And we also have more, practical jokes, pranksters. If we stir things up a bit, make things more exciting, make things more interesting, make them more glamorous, make them more creative, more intellectual, more colourful, more in tune with the art world, intellectual traditions. And what you want is to get this stuff, away from the art gallery, more into ordinary life. And we want it to be so that if somebody, what we wanted and what we've got, in some quarters, but not entirely, because it's balanced by an extreme censoriousness and liability to, for people to combust at getting offended. But obviously we have seen this both trends in society over the last few decades. On the one hand, we do have a more creativity applied and a more relaxed attitude towards ordinary life, as well as the more censorious attitudes coming from the other side. I would be to combust and take offence. And we have had to some extent, people applying A more artistic or creative approaches to ordinary life, more room for individual self-expression, clothes that people wear. But then, to some extent, that's still fairly, very limited. And you actually don't very often get people singing in the streets, with joy. Um, you, you know, there's seeming unnecessary lack of more positive manifestations of creative, personal, artistic spontaneity, in our streets, on our streets. Uh, Although obviously we do get quite a bit of it as well. Um, but, uh, Another great example of this kind of thing, is comedian Sacha Baron Cohen, now Ali G. Especially what he did near the beginning of his career, where he really took a character, where he was acting very artistically designed, and applied it to real life, interviewing real people, very, very, interesting and serious, quite serious people, competent, interesting people in their own right, and he brought a completely fictional character into that real life, and that was it's like one of the most beautiful and enjoyable, cultural events of the past 50 years, and um, it's sadly quite unique, um, and it's not clear that the potential for that kind of thing has been fully tapped, in any way, and um, and also, obviously, it's quite a violent image in this aphorism, because we want real emotion, at almost any cost, in public life or in the world itself. It's kind of a riff on the idea of Antonin Artaud, the theatre of absurdity, theatre of the absurd, or theatre of cruelty, um, where you have to some extent more of a blending of life and art in potentially risky ways. Um, where life becomes more theatrical and theatre becomes more real. Um, it's very, very hard to do because it's genuinely scary, and it's not clear if it's sustainable or it's just attractive because of its novelty. Um, and the magic of it itself will fade. Despite all the trouble it takes to try to manifest in the first place. Um, it seems to be, a terrible, terrible problem. Many people feel that, with the superficiality of life, and the public life, or more intense, real emotion within it, in our lives, you know, not ashamed to suffer or to show suffering, and, beginning to heal and correct problems by manifesting those problems, those emotions which signal those problems, and get to the truth of what people really want, what they really feel, rather than having to keep appearances and, just feeling a danger in just being themselves, or letting the side down, through the appearance. So this is a powerful trend in young people, or can be, that are very discouraged by the superficiality of the adult world. One of the main ways of therapy is by getting back in touch with nature, with their real underlying emotions. This is a perennial theme and dynamic in psychological neurosis and happiness, and then the therapeutic attempt to deal with it, which is explicitly obviously dealt with in writers like Freud very much, and other writers, um, probably most writers, I don't know. Like one of my favourite writers is Yuki Mishima, who also writes about this sort of thing, very much a Japanese writer, novelist. So that is one of the general themes and tendencies of my writing, which I think sets where I'm coming from, apart from other people, and that that's something I'm very, very focused on, which may be of interest to people. Um, um, and the obsession with authenticity. Um, uh, and so that I won't make it people suffer any longer with talking about this more, I suppose, because I don't know, YouTube may not accept the video because it's too long already anyway now. But please, if I have not put people off already, too much already, and just made them tune out already, this long-winded video, please reach out, to my email, which will be in the video below the video, or one of my other social media accounts. And if you have any questions, or just want to talk with me, ad nauseum about this, I'm just completely available, and I'd love to talk about it with you, particularly with the idea of, if you could publish this or help me find a publisher, or help me get it to a wide audience, I mean, just ideas in general about the way I should be going about this project, or how you might lend a hand if you want, if you're interested to do so, or just if you want to talk about, my what I'm doing, my writing, my work, you know, um, from the perspective of a fellow artist or thinker, poet, philosopher, member of the public, uh, um, um, and be happy to engage with you, polite conversation about this or about anything. In fact, if it might draw you into what I'm doing, um, and you know, whoever you are, probably, as long as you're going to be polite, um, and tolerant, understanding, and relatively encouraging what I'm doing. I'll be happy to speak to you about it, and just get in touch with me, please. But even more, if you're like a publishing company, potentially associated with one, with a fellow author, then and you might be interested in helping me get the book published. That would just be perfect. And or if you'd like to interview me about this stuff, um, for a show or something or anything, or or if you want to argue with me, if you do want to argue with me, then as long as you're reasonably polite and maybe not too ad hominem, then basically, I'm looking to debate and to argue with probably pretty much anyone, as long as they're somewhat civil. Um, um, about mental health, about philosophy, about poetry, about science, from whatever subject, whatever angle. I can't totally promise to know everything and be up to everything, be right about everything, and every topic to be totally interesting or to persuade you or to even to hold my own. But I'm confident that in fact on most subjects I'm not too embarrassed to discuss them and or debate them. Especially if it's any controversial point of view that I put forward in my writing, which may, if you take if you're picking the odd sentence, there may be there may be considerable hyperbole in that, and they use a lot of irony. So, um, if you want to interpret the book correctly, you'd have to be aware of that. But on the other hand, I do have a number of stances, about things and lots of arguments behind them. And I'd love to engage more with people, either in a more adversarial way or in a just a friendly, conversational way about these interesting intellectual and also important social moral topics, such as involuntary commitment to patients and mental health, and the drugging of people, and the dynamic, the general atmosphere of these places in psychiatry, mental health, or culture, the whole, the details, some of the details as well, and the kind of way that relates to the philosophical tradition, or topics like religion and versus atheism, and um, I was hoping that I'd be able to debate people like Richard Dawkins and things like that, a few years ago, but because um, and aside from that, I have several other books which are in various stages, you're semi-published already, and some not published, which I'm also very, very eager to try and get a publisher for, and which are shorter and potentially more accessible, or readable in some ways to many people. It might be more marketable, um, and I think I'd love for people to consider whether they might be willing to publish any of those, which, despite the fact that some of them are, officially self-published, fortunately have sold almost no copies, and it's potentially a much wider audience. So this is max.lewy signing off. Please seriously consider investing in supporting what I'm doing, my writing. Helping me find a publisher, publishing my writing. This is another one of my books, Volume 2 of Illuminated Poems, which has not been published yet, completely unpublished. It contains lots of carefully, artistically illustrated versions of my poems. See, also in this book we have black and white images, poems and memes, etc. Um, so I've been trying to sell them online um, for about a year now, lots of them, and marketing my work and stuff. And although I've tried really hard, and I've got some interest, perhaps, I've got very little, official, signs, you know, of people really supporting my writing and will buy my books. Um, except on my blog, I've got multiple likes and hits. More recently, yes, over several at least, on each post. A bit more, but not a huge amount. But so um, so perhaps it's time that people would try and promote some of this, which could potentially help and inspire a huge number of people, reaching people the way Jordan Peterson has reached people, except a slightly more joyful and youthful, vibrant feel to it, reaching beyond his audience, but including some of the people who like his stuff. Um, I admit I am the dragon, the Welsh dragon, which he was trying to slay. Um, Perhaps he did, or someone did. Um, and so I am his natural successor. I'm his heir. Uh, the identified victim. Uh, so do you think he should have a bit more competition, a bit more support? One or the other, or both? Don't underestimate me as a good candidate. Um, um, well, I don't know. Some reason I don't feel the signal to stop. Talk more. See what? Do you want to see what's on my desk? Well, various books. Here we have the Muhammad Code. How a desert prophet brought to you ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Boko Haram by the Howard the Homunculus, Howard Bloom, the omnologist, PR wizard, all-round scientist and philosopher, one of the leading thinkers of contemporary times. We brought you such classics as the Lucifer Principle, the Global Brain, the Genius of the Beast, and how I accidentally started the 60s. His poetic demotic style, very American, exuberant prose, was, one of the things that inspired me, when I was gestating my own writings, my own book, and his ideas about the global brain, about sociology, interconnectedness of human beings and life on the planet. It's one of the the main formative influences on my my philosophical understandings and ideas about the world, about psychology, which I assimilated and somehow or other, put into my own writings. A real a great writer, bringing us, wisdom pretty much on a level with the classics like Nietzsche himself, but novel as well, and with his own totally idiosyncratic and totally different personality, making him a real interesting and enjoyable, stimulating guy to read. Which is something that I've tried to go along similar lines towards. Then there's Be Water, My Friend by Bruce Lee and Shannon Lee, his daughter, I believe. And this one I haven't read yet, or very much of, but Bruce Lee is another great example for people today, of a really beautiful person who is really, really good from the heart, almost every way, and real fighter, but somebody who was really he was like David against Goliath, and because I think he was eventually assassinated, understand it, or at least, and his son was as well. Brandon Lee, dying at fairly early, young ages, due to conspiracies, because conspiracy theories, you can't understand conspiracies, real life conspiracies, in which people are getting killed, some of the best people in the world, unless you are a conspiracy theorist, can you? Because unless you're a conspiracy theorist, you can't even theorize the idea of conspiracies, can you? You have to at least put forward the theory before you can assess whether it's true or not. If you never put forward the theory, if you never become a conspiracy theorist, you will never correctly identify a potential conspiracy, of which there are many, and of which kill many of our best people, like Bruce Lee and his son. But if, of course, in psychiatry, the very idea of conspiracies is considered paranoid, and will get a conspiracy against you in the form of doctors and nurses ruining your life. So in Bruce Lee, there's this is a good idea. Be water, my friends. It's about going with the flow. It's not in keeping with Taoism. It's going with the flow, going with the way of all things. And some really, really, distinctive wisdoms, in a real crystalline, perfect, beautiful manifestation. The harmony of life and art, in the person of Bruce Lee. He's enormously kind, giving advices to people, particularly young people, about how to free themselves from propaganda, even in his own time. Become, an individuated individual, not just a rarefied intellectual who talks about individuation, but somebody who actually does it. Combining martial arts in his case, and the way of the warrior with the way of the philosopher, and the arts of meditation, and it's in a terse and very purest form, because there's not much fat, in Bruce Lee. It's just perfect dough-like perfection. And particularly with the world as it is today, he's a good thinker to go back to. And I know he's obviously unique in his own way, and he provides a perspective that you won't get so much in other writers and thinkers, particularly the ones who are more rarefied, disembodied intellectuals. Who only talk about these things, and they suffer from what Nietzsche described, as indigestion, German indigestion. They talk a lot. Do they apply, what they're doing? Does it amount to anything? Does it have fundamental heart and beauty and goodness, or is it just endless talking? Because our whole culture has been over-intellectualized, in many ways for a long time. So we have lots and lots of talking, lots and lots of scholars, hundreds of thousands, millions of them. But this just causes a kind of flatulence in the collective mind, which makes everything hollowed out of its real meaning. To use Jordan Peterson's term, when you have too much flatulent words, what you have then is nihilism. You have a sense of meaningless, of the world being hollowed out by all these words, all these ideas, but no heart, no meaning, no purpose. That is one of the, that has been one of the central dangers of our era for many, many people and young people. Particularly those prone to, excessive thinking. Because the whole education system does not create a proper balance and harmony between the mind and body, between the real life and the intellectual life. It does the exact opposite of drawing a very strict distinction and very little correlation between the two, which somebody who is inherently young when they're docile, if they're a docile individual, then they will not put two and two together. They will not connect the two. They will not connect things. So they will have a very hard time, growing up and not be the most best they can be and get the most out of their education because they have docilely accepted the separation between intellectual and physical life. Whereas, great novels or the intellectual tradition is a whole different strand which goes, tries to connect life and art, life and in the life and the mind. But then even they, many of them are just like, armchair philosophers, decadent intellectuals. But then you have the third category where you really have the artists and the writers who really strove for harmony, a total oneness between life and art, like Bruce Lee and Yukio Mishima, or Jesus, where what you do get is genuine, amazing harmony and equality between the two, which is really something else, and very interesting phenomenon. So then there's like Michel Houellebecq, The Map of the Territory. Journey bought recently. Michel Houellebecq is obviously he's one of the greatest novelists, if not the greatest novelist of our era, and he is somebody who has, I don't know, there's some blending of life and art in his stuff, I suppose, but he's more of the decadent French aesthete, and he fights through the force of his scorn, in his sentences, but and his critique of capitalism and the imagination of a kind of like tourist, erotic tourist paradise, throwing new possibilities and light on in the modern the modern world, and invading extremely poignant ways. Um, yeah. The French are some of my favourite writers and authors. Really, I guess they appreciate nature. You go back to Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, um, and food, good food, and love, um, and beauty, and scorn. These for me are the most healthy characteristics, in the world, and they basically point the way to a much, much healthier, slightly more old-fashioned way of being, which could basically drastically improve lots of people's lives, potentially, basically save the health system, from millions or billions of pounds or dollars by just keeping people healthy by, basically taking care of themselves in a natural way. Uh, Rather than subjecting themselves to mindless propaganda and artificial chemicals. Because the French, it's distinctive to their tradition that they have more homage to nature, with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, noble savage, who for me is still the model, basically, of all striving and yearning and all true philosophy. My opinion, better, more fundamental um, than the later philosophers like Nietzsche, and more well-rounded, more harmonious, more good, more benevolent, more beautiful, more gentle, more harmless, yet at the same time extremely enjoyable. Um, so cannot really, praise them highly enough. And this is something which is somewhat neglected still in our society, which I would hope to be one of the messengers of bringing it, bringing this message to more and more people. Of a life, subject not to arbitrary convention, prejudice, but true conservatism, which is the conservatism of nature, with free minds, but uh, not free for anything or nothing, not nihilistic, but feeling natural, basking in the enjoyment of their own being, content, rather than endlessly consuming and destroying. In a frustrated battle for something which they know not what, for some kind of meaning that is ever elusive. Some kind of scheme which is beyond themselves and which is just going to hurt lots of people in the process and make them bad-tempered if they don't realise that it's it's the journey that's important, not ideologies. And it's important for people on the right to understand that, as well as people on the left. Unfortunately, the people who really need to understand are the left. It's going to be not much hope in hell of communicating to them, obviously, because they're just unrepentant sinners. Let's see. So then there's Max.lewy, Mystical Messiah by Gershom Shalom. It's the Messiah of 1666 is when he was alive. Came along, wrote his main work, and he's kind of the next Christian prophet apart from Jesus. He's like the next biggest one. Although he was officially Jewish, and he was a Jewish Messiah, or would-be Messiah, and founded a considerable movement based upon the notion of redemption through sin, which is of course a very Christian idea. It's a radicalization of the Christian doctrine in many ways, and based on the ideas of Kabbalah and of course in Christianity and Revelations there's the idea in Revelations of 666 being an important number of the Antichrist, and means intuition or something. So you can see he has a importance both to the Jewish traditions and communities, and also potentially also to the Christian ones. And in all probability, he was actually like a true prophet and Messiah. And he created quite a significant following. In many ways, if you look at the modern world, what you have is the doctrine of redemption through sin. You have a straying from the principles of the Old Testament, or even the New Testament in many ways, into a apparently sinful society based upon precisely the 7 deadly sins which are usually forbidden. Greed, gluttony, lust, total disproportionate freedom, and seduction to vice and temptation, in all the ways that in the Old Testament, in the the old religious traditions, would be considered sinful, considered taboo, and against God's will and against God's law. These things are becoming rampant, and society in fact based upon them in many ways, and the stigma against them taken away, because the idea of sin is, of course, ridiculous, to modern people. We're told in schools. And so this is all kind of like the idea of redemption through sin, it's a secular morality which is based upon the idea of consumerism and greed, as somehow fueling a better society rather than a worse society. And one of the initiators and founders of this idea was Sabbatai Sevi. The basic idea is that you stray, you go far, like the prodigal son, away from God, and then in order to get back to Him, because in the darkest night, that is where God reveals Himself, and the light finally emerges, and He draws you back towards Him. And in many ways, we can see that this was one of the foundational ideas of our society, a fundamentally religious idea, which may or may not have been consciously applied to a greater or lesser extent as justification of the society that we've created, and which, in fact, awaits to be fulfilled and made good. And the surprising fact that atheism was in fact just a religious idea, a religious idea based upon the redemption through sin, and in time we will return to the original plan, or the revelation of that plan, of it being a plan, being God's plan, and the fundamental superiority and truth of the religious worldview of Christianity, Judaism, and that's in itself a fascinating new understanding which I have to bring the world. Of course, in Christianity the idea is that Jesus comes, He forgives your sins, so this is inherently morally ambiguous, and we've seen that it's been potentially, we can see that this is part of the cause, or the apparent cause, for much of the corruption in the church, and the immorality of society, including the Christian communities and society, because they're just told that, oh no, Jesus will forgive you, and that is emphasized as perhaps one of the most important doctrines, rather than morality itself. And this is very similar. It's only a different shade of emphasis to the idea of redemption through sin itself. Because of course, if nobody was a sinner, what would Jesus have to do? He would have nothing to do. He would be irrelevant. So Christianity is based partly on a dynamic where sinning becomes almost obligatory for a Christian, or for human beings, because it's part of what gives their Saviour, Jesus, His power and authority, magnificence. So that is why Sabbatai Sevi, could be seen as in harmony with the Christian tradition of encouraging sin in order to prepare the way for Jesus. Um, and that's very interesting because of course, the hidden logical, other implication of that is that sin actually exists and is real, and basically, in many ways, the old religious worldview of sin and maybe the Old Testament, rules and regulation, etc., may, in some respects, even be true. Because it's not such a ridiculous theory that people become unhealthy and societies degenerate because they actually do fall into something, like sin, which may even be divinely ordained. And fundamentally spiritual in nature. Um, as the fundamental truth of the universe, which people need to be aware of if they need to live the best life that they can, and the most powerful life in line with God's will, creating health and beauty, riches for themselves in the future, and potentially also, in the next life. And then there's the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, which I didn't ever read much of, but I assume most of the arguments were just elaborations of the kind of thing you get in Bertrand Russell and Why I'm Not a Christian. And Richard Dawkins, obviously makes time-honoured arguments which have a logical importance, and they need to be taken on board by members of the Christian community who generally do fall prey to some of the fallacies and flaws which Dawkins will point out. Even though some of Dawkins' arguments may not be quite as watertight or strong as he thinks they are, and they also neglect huge whole areas of genuine knowledge, while at the same time conveying the impression to the reader that modern science is much, much more watertight in general, when probably isn't. And in reality, the truth lies more somewhere in between. I have a book, Poetry Sublimation, by my friend Kim Van Breda. He's a quite, very passionate Christian in some ways, typical kind of like of the Christian right, and it makes sensitive, elusive poetry. Please buy her books. But she doesn't seem to take on board, the kind of justified criticisms that non-Christian people have of the Christian worldview. And what you find is that most Christians are not all that great communicating to non-Christians about things about Christianity which might actually appeal to other people. The fundamental philosophical attractions. But instead they conform a bit too much to the stereotypes of overbearing American Christians. Has Yuki Mishima, Forbidden Colors. And Yuki Mishima is probably my favourite novelist of all time. Probably always will be. Because his writing has that purity, emotional depth, poetic laconic, terse, economical way with language. To me, is the best style of writing. He was a Capricorn, like Jesus, and that means he is quiet, but always working towards some greater good. And that is the most admirable qualities, in human beings, and it gives them their emotional depth. And the essence, in the heart to everything they do. If you already have the ideas, the one thing that you lack or want to combine it with is, Jordan Peterson's words, meaning, some underlying essence and heart. Which makes the words on the page perfectly real. for me, one of the central truths of existence, and writing is that, the quieter somebody is, the more when they do speak, the more weight their words have. That is the Capricorn way of being. And that's what you have in writing Suzuki Mishima. Bible, yeah. Mask of Dionysus, the god of intoxication wine, Greek god. That's Sabbatai Sevi. This is actually slightly a draft where the bottom has been cut off. So I should say first do no harm there. Lion of Judah, Last Dragon. Reflex of knee-jerk reactions to human problems. The drugging, the pills. Mad trees, man being electrocuted, struck by lightning. My mind's page. Don't be afraid to think you might be a bit crazy. Who isn't? The gaslighting slogan of new radical philosophy. I think, therefore I'm mad. A new cogito ergo amends, after Descartes, philosopher. Enter the dragon. Don't slay the dragon, just enter the dragon. In a sense of be invited into the dragon's secret wisdoms. And hidden, ancient, mysterious, potent knowledge. Face your demons. And become a cultural, social justice warrior. Mad miracles a dozen, blessings. Um, uh, uh, don't be afraid to think you might be a bit crazy. Who isn't? Enter the dragon. Madness is a form of love, a philosophy for the future. Reason plus mad love equals collective harmony. First, do no harm. Order through chaos. Know thyself. Know thy enemy. Love your enemy. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your God with all your heart. And all I know is I know nothing. Every man or woman is a star. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Become thyself. Esse homo. How one becomes what one is. Why I am so wise. Why I am so clever. The Antichrist, the twilight of the idols. Thus spoke Zarathustra. The gay science. Genealogy of morals. One flew over the cuckoo's nest. Living in end times. The medium is the message. The closing of the American mind. Beautiful losers. Daybreak. Philosophy in the boudoir. Infinite jest. Ride the tiger. Atomized. Never mind.